Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And we're going to change things up a little bit. We got a little panel discussion here. I'm Mike Reilly. I'm co-founder of Project Glitch. We're a journalism outlet. We cover blockchain and emerging technologies, especially decentralized systems. And I've got a couple of guests spanning the globe. We're very happy to have right here in the room with us, in the flesh, Jay Stanley. He's a senior policy analyst with ACLU, Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. And joining us from all the way from Australia is Art Abal. He's a managing director of the Vana Foundation. And Vana has launched an L1, and they're dedicated to building the rails for user-owned AI. So we're going to talk today about AI and decentralized AI. This is a subject I really enjoy. So with that, we'll turn it over to Art. I want to start with you because I want you to sort of introduce yourself and Vana and tell us a little bit about how it all works and what it's all about.
Well, hello, folks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're doing great so far.
Okay, awesome, cool. Hello, thank you for having me, guys. There's a slight echo, so I'm going to speak a little bit slower than normal just so that I don't get the echo. But my name's Art. I'm calling in from Australia, so I'm the managing director of the Vana Foundation. My co-founder and I started this project probably two and a half, 3 years ago out of the MIT Media Lab with the vision of basically creating user-owned rails for how data is transacted in the world today. Data is such a critical input to all of the technology that we use. I'm sure folks in the room probably have used a chatbot, an LLM or something today. Well, there's data in that, and some of that data is yours. And we don't currently have a system of rails in place to ensure that people have full control over that data, full ownership of it, and reap the benefits of that system. So we've constructed Vana as this user-owned system using decentralized networks because we don't believe that one corporate entity should be in charge of the rails of data in such a critical input for AI. A little bit of background about me. I used to work for one of the larger data brokers, buying and selling a lot of the data that kind of happens in some behind closed doors. There's some crazy stuff that happens with your data that I was privy to. I mean, before that, I was a qualitative researcher working with the Harvard Belfer Center at the Kennedy School. Okay,
great, thank you. So you've seen how the data sausage is made, and
I've seen how the sausage is made. I've had the privilege, and it was a terrifying privilege to be part of that process.
Great. And Jay, you don't always work on AI, but lately you have written a number of posts about LLMs and the evolution of LLMs. So what got you interested in exploring that?
I remember a quote a long time ago from George Orwell, and he was writing about the history of weapons, and he said some weapons, like muskets, are inherently democratic. They are simple, easily distributed, very widespread. And he argued that other weapons, like tanks, are inherently despotic, inherently authoritarian. And the question is, which is LLMs? Are they like tanks? Are they like muskets? Another writer, Langdon Winner, I think his name was, wrote this book called The Reactor and the Whale, and he sort of asks the same question and argues that a technology like nuclear power is inherently authoritarian. It's centralized. It requires huge capital investments. It's dangerous, requires high levels of security, and it inherently leads itself to hierarchical organization. Whereas something like solar power is much more distributed, much simpler, doesn't have the security concerns, and is inherently more democratic in its. And so the argument is that technologies have an inherent politics in how they are built and how they are structured. And again, which one is large language models? This thing that has burst into the scene, at least for most people's awareness, only a couple years ago. And of course, it's possible to build for a decentralized technology like solar power to be, built in a centralized way. We could have huge centralized solar farms that are all run by big companies, and that's it. Or we could have everybody has their own in a network, as we are often seeing. Another example of a technology is like broadcast television, which is arguably more authoritarian. A lot of authoritarian governments use broadcast television in authoritarian ways to propagandize their populations, versus something like the copy machine, which was used in Soviet Russia to circulate samizdat, circulate forbidden materials, was used to copy the Pentagon Papers and leak those to the American people so that the American people could see what was actually happening in Vietnam, which was being covered up by large government agencies. Of course, a copy machine can be more authoritarian. For example, a lot of copy machines today have hidden codes that are printed in there. And a broadcast television, if it's subject to decentralization, anti-monopoly laws, free speech laws, and so forth, doesn't necessarily have to be authoritarian. So a lot depends on how things are actually implemented as well.
Okay, so I think we're probably both picking up that you, Jay, and you, Art, have sort of different approaches to what it means to decentralize AI. And you probably have some overlap here, but I think it's worth kind of like drawing the lines a little bit. So for you're talking about decentralization in sort of the broadest sense, the decentralization of power. Right now we know that OpenAI and a few other companies control most of the power as it relates to LLMs. It's very centralized right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, although things are looking much less that way than they did when ChatGPT first burst into public awareness. It really looked like this was something that only the very largest companies could do. It was sort of big science. It was like the Manhattan Project, and that we would have to go through the cloud to the very small number of companies that could afford the billions of dollars of investment that it required, with huge server farms, with interconnect, and since then we've seen a number of trends that have been pushing in the opposite direction. And we're not, it's not clear which way things are really going to go. But and I have pieces on sort of access to the ability to train a foundation model, access to the ability to run local models, and open source. I think are three of the key metrics.
So I'm curious about a couple of things. First, there's sort of an assumption that centralization is bad. I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a second. And, I think some people might argue, well, we never would have gotten these capabilities if we didn't have the huge masses of compute, huge masses of data to train on, and so on and so forth. And actually, I'm interested in both of your responses to that. Maybe Art, you could take it first.
Yeah, I'll take it back to the kind of centralization of power theme, which I think I love those comparisons of the technologies, the muskets and the tanks, and thinking about how power is kind of diffused there. My view on it is that would we have gotten here today had we not had central repositories of data and central repositories of compute? Yes, but a lot slower. I think that because of the centralization that has occurred in technology generally, I look at things in the way that data has been centralized. So we talk about power in these technologies, but actually the power in AI is actually data now. We've reached what's called a data wall. All of the public data has already gone into a lot of these LLMs, and now there's a concentration of power in private data silos. And when we look at decentralization, that's essentially what we're trying to break up in creating a decentralized protocol for data, because the power is becoming increasingly centralized with these tech giants because they have so much data that they can use to train. So would we have been able to create these foundation models had we not centralized this? I don't think we would have done it as quickly. But should we continue with this system going forward? I think it's too much power that's increasingly becoming centralized as the public internet runs out of data. So I would say we should not.
Okay. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think it's certainly true that large companies with the capital to do basic, deep research on this have been essential to it. And that's just a fact. It probably wouldn't be, we wouldn't be where we are today without Google and OpenAI having made those giant investments. But that's not the same as looking forward, like where is this technology going to end up? Because you can have, like we had Bell Labs, right, which was a very centralized research facility and invented a lot of things in American life that are now pretty distributed. And so the question, I think the important question, and we're seeing a broad democratization. You can get access to huge data sets that are bigger than what GPT-3 and GPT-4 were trained on, that are basically publicly accessible data sets to train a base model. And it's becoming increasingly easy for smaller and smaller organizations to train base models. The question is, what's the quality difference?
Sure. So do you think that that's, again, this is going to be a question for both of you, but I'll let you go first, Jay. Do you think that this evolution, this sort of like natural progression, if you want to call it that, of the rise of open source models, doing inference on the edge or on device, all of this stuff that is happening kind of its own accord as the technology develops, is that enough to decentralize the power structure that we see in AI?
I think the jury's still out. And what I did in my pieces on the ACLU's technology blog, aclu.org/free future, it's called Free Future, the blog, is I just sort of try to assess the prospects in the future across open source, decentralized models, local models, and the ability for non-giant companies to train base models. And things have been improving on all those fronts. I wouldn't in no way say that it's natural or inevitable it's going to happen. We could end up with OpenAI and Google, running everything and having that enormous power that we are, they already have enormous power with search, with social media companies that gives them enormous political power, scary amount of political power. But we know that large language models will have a role. It appears clear that they're going to have a role in how people write, how people think, how people communicate. That will be very, very important going forward. And if those models are biased in certain directions, if they include political agendas that might be very subtle and they guide how people think and how people write, there's a lot of potential for abuse there. So yeah.
What about, I think I know what you're going to say. Well, I think I know the binary of your answer, Art, but please, I want to hear your thoughts.
I want to just touch on this point of should it be open source or should it be private? And I think that that's essentially the dichotomy there is the problem here, because we have one system that's profit driven and very productive because it's driven towards profit, and another system that's very altruistic. And you have a problem in altruistic systems around coordination and incentives. And that's why open source models will tend to not be the fastest to develop in this way. And we've seen that already play out with Stable Diffusion and Stability versus some of the other diffusion models. We've seen that in terms of the large language models, where open source contributions haven't done as well. Like you compare Llama to something like Claude or GPT-5. So we're in this strange system right now where we've kind of stacked incentives towards profit-driven AI, and we don't have another alternative except for open source. And that's what we're trying to suggest, that maybe we should have collectively owned models where we each have skin in the game, and we each should have skin in the game in relation to a lot of these models that have been built. Because I always go back to the data. I'm sure folks in the room have used ChatGPT today, and you're probably paying for it, and it probably has your data in it, which is kind of perverse in this way of it feels like data colonialism to me. You're extracting something of value that you've used to create a product that now you're selling back to me. And these, just to touch on that last point of they are very powerful companies, but what's most concerning to me as we transition towards an AI-based economy is the flywheel effect of some of the products that they're developing. So let's take ChatGPT, for example. It trains on your data unless you opt out. So the more data you put in, the better the model gets, which increases your incentives to use that same model, which then increases the amount of data that you put in that model, which makes that model better and increases your incentives to use that model. So you end up with these really crazy compounding effects that then create even higher concentrations of a very, very valuable resource in this, which is data. And I'll just touch on that last point in relation to the public data sets. I think we have done a lot of good work in terms of open sourcing data, but the majority of data that creates that edge in terms of AI is exchanged in these private backdoor deals or is trained on data that the platforms collect themselves. We're seeing Claude this month switch their policy to allow or to default to use a training of data for this reason. And I think that we have a broken data ecosystem or data economy that allows this to happen and incentivizes people to go down this direction.
Your response?
I mean, I think one of the open questions is how valuable will additional data prove moving forward? There's no question that there has been a diminishing returns to scale in training. Now that some people say that the reason we've seen diminishing returns to scale in terms of the amount of compute that's put in to each generation has not been matched by a similar scale in data. It may not be possible to have multiple, jumps in order of magnitude in the amount of data that's trained that matches the order of magnitude jumps we've done in compute. But a lot of people do perceive that there's a leveling out of quality. It's becoming harder and harder and more subtle to tell the difference between one model and another. And at the same time, I think that there are reasons that it could go both ways in terms of to what extent LLMs can be decentralized. There is an enormous need for people to use models that have privacy, either personal privacy or organizations that just can't share their documents, and yet they want to be able to use LLMs to sift through their document library. And this is like police stations. I've talked to police departments who want to do this, and a bunch of different organizations. The ACLU, we would love to use LLMs in some ways to do internal analysis of documents we can't share publicly. And I think many organizations are in that. And so that will create a huge demand for, and the only way you can really trust privacy is if it's completely local. And it is true that I think that the open models lack the very frontier models, but they're not that far behind. You can run on your laptop policies that LLMs models that are more powerful than GPT-4, which was like for a year and a half was the world's strongest model, like 2 years ago. And so there's a lag, and the question is, will the frontier models created by the big companies continue to be ahead, and will they be far enough ahead that people only want to use them and don't want to use slightly less, maybe good, maybe like ambiguously, perceptively good models locally?
So I think this is interesting because I think there's a tendency for all of us to kind of focus on the very frontier, right, of AI performance, and whether GPT-5 High is like better than Claude 4 Opus, and there's a lot of sort of digital ink spilled over the intricacies of these things. And what I wonder is, and to your point, Art, I think maybe I would characterize it slightly differently, that someone who uses one of those products a lot may indeed be training it to know you better. But I think what's just happening is sort of like garden variety brand loyalty, or you get as much as there is maybe an improvement in performance. People are just getting used to it. They're like, I like this. I like the way it talks to me. I like the way it sounds. Some people find the voices of certain AIs a little bit more wooden or too sycophantic or whatever. So, there's just kind of like the customer experience component as well. But okay, so I want to shift gears just a little bit, because what I'm interested in here is we've been kind of going back and forth on this sort of open source model versus highly centralized, profit-driven thing. And Art, you've suggested in your building, a third way. I'm curious, Jay, what you think about this approach of combining financial incentive with data ownership. I'm asking you essentially what you already hinted at. You have some hesitation to me about earlier, which is, can crypto rails help solve this dilemma?
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. I more have questions about it. Yeah. We've heard for many years as a privacy advocate, I've heard various schemes for allowing individuals to have more ownership of their data, to profit from their data that's being, basically given away for free in some ways. Various fiduciary models and third-party models and so forth. And so none of them have really taken off. So that's a source of skepticism. But things are true until one day they're not. So maybe this will take off. I don't know. But I guess a lot of my questions, are around the future of LLMs, as I was saying, and to what extent what the marginal improvements come from additional data, including personal data, compared to the huge leap that we achieved by basically training LLMs on the whole internet, and that, and so I guess that's the source of my main skepticism.
So so I think there's an interesting sort of, again, middle ground here, which I'll come back to. So we're very focused on frontier performance, or how well these things work. But, if anybody was, I don't know if you all are Apple fans or whatever, but when the Worldwide Developer Conference happened, was it May? Everybody kind of who was into AI was like, oh, Apple they fumbled the ball. Like, everybody was waiting for their big AI model release, and there was like crickets, right? I'm not the only one to have this take, but there is a take out there that is kind of more like, actually what they did was they released this thing called foundation models, right? Which is a lower performance tier of inference model that will exist for anyone who participates as an app developer in the Apple ecosystem. Basically a huge carrot to walk away from the very, very frontier and instead live in the Apple ecosystem with a model that performs like pretty well for almost everything you would normal people would want to do, unless you're doing like really, really complex coding projects, running like orchestrating sub agents and doing all kinds of like really crazy shit. So I guess what I'm saying is, do we have to worry so much about these? Also bear in mind, like, right, these companies, Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, are building their brand on the idea that they can deliver essentially AGI. I mean, I don't think Anthropic doesn't. Do they say that in the same way that OpenAI does? I'm not sure, but they're trying to push this like science fiction future, right? But for most people, we don't need that. Do we need that? Do we want that? Are we going to use that in our day-to-day lives? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I think if we get to AGI, it will be huge and revolutionary. But I do think that maybe it is partly a marketing selling point in the way that, we'll have driverless cars in 3 years was sort of a big premise of Uber for a long time. It does seem like you could have. I mean, there things are pulling in different directions. Like, everybody wants to use the best, and so I switch among the different frontier models, and like they have.
You were like, I want the best one.
Yeah, for a lot of things you kind of do, right? Yeah. And also there's a brand name, right? The very first one, like OpenAI.
By the way, I'm not judging you for it.
No, I know. I'm just a reflection of everybody else. Like, OpenAI is a brand name, and they may never lose that. Also, as Moxie Marlinspike, the founder of Signal, famously said, nobody wants to run their own server, right? And that is a huge barrier to decentralization across many areas, including crypto. He was very critical. He's like, crypto has become centralized, and because nobody wants to run their own server. In theory, we have decentralized technologies, email and web, but everybody uses Gmail. Okay. You could have your own email server,
totally,
but everybody uses Gmail, and LLMs could be that way too. And the very ambiguity about which one is better can mean that brands become important, because it's so subjective which one you like better, because the differences aren't that large, that you go with a brand.
Right.
Or it could be that because it doesn't matter that much and the differences are so subtle, that the advantages of having something slightly less than the top way outweigh it. And that maybe was what you're talking about with Apple's potential calculation. It remains to be seen whether Apple is really, really smart here and not spending a couple $1 billion and doing something that others are doing that's just going to become open source in 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I think, Art, you probably have something to say about this, yeah? Because, well, especially on the usability component, how are you going to access users, right? These giant companies that we've been talking about are, in many cases, just way, way ahead, like orders of magnitude. So you've been thinking about this and trying to bring your approach to regular people, right?
Well, one of the things that I think we focused in on a lot in this discussion is LLMs, but we've also got to remember that the majority of AI that we interact with every day is not just LLMs. We interact with it whenever we get suggested things. We interact with it when we go to the doctors. We interact with it in all sorts of facets of life. And that's where the data piece actually becomes quite important, because their ability to create performance in not just LLMs is still contingent upon them having niche data. I was actually on the phone yesterday with a company that's providing AI-based therapy, and they want human interaction data with AI, and they actually want to try to get a bunch of therapists' data. And one concerning thing was there's a statistic right now that Generation Alpha is using AI for more relationship kind of discussions versus Gen X and Gen Z using it for more productivity. And so they posed a question to me. They're like, I'm wondering if we could get this data set from ChatGPT or from OpenAI. And I'm like, you probably could, because people are using it for that reason. And this goes to this whole point. The brand piece is actually very important, but that's the entryway. Part of the reason why I don't switch from the LLM that I use is because it now has a lot of context information about me that makes it very challenging for me to switch to another provider. And one of my other key theses here is like data portability is incredibly important to allow for this decentralization, whether it's on crypto or anywhere else. In order for us to really be able to have free choice in relation to what LLMs or what AI we use, we need to be able to take that context and that information and put it somewhere else. And I think that's probably one of the more one of the more challenging barriers that I see, which is causing there to be such I think economic dystopia right now in the way AI is emerging. It's this idea that we're locked in these platforms and they have 30 days if they're under GDPR to comply with a request to move my data somewhere else. That sounds crazy to me. It doesn't take 30 days for them to run a script. It's not like you have little data fairies chipping away at my data. It's literally, if you can give me if you can give me inference in 30 seconds, you can give me my data in 30 seconds as well. So we've created a system that makes the incumbency effect quite prominent and quite powerful. And Jay, to your point, like if it's giving us specific political ideology, it's really hard to then switch to another platform because of the context that we have within that within that platform as well.
I just think we'd all be better off if we were in a world where there is a multiplicity, 1,000 flowers bloom of models that are out there, rather than 3 models that everybody uses. A lot of people in the industry speculate that may be the future of LLMs, that it's not like one frontier model that everybody uses, but hundreds or thousands of individually trained specialist models rather than one generalist model. And that actually is an argument that data will be important because, and a lot of analysts say that we're shifting from base model training to post training, where you put a lot more resources into specializing a model, especially training a model, for example, to be a chat model and have a high personality, or to be a reasoning model that is really good at math and sort of objective things and so forth. And we could have a model for lawyers and a model, and if we have that future, and the likely thing is we'll have both in some proportion, but insofar as becomes really important to have really specialized models that are really, really good in one area, then I think that the need for data may very likely continue to be high.
Yeah, the majority of folks that we work with to access some of the user-owned data sets are folks who want to do model fine-tuning, so that post-training. It's one of the use cases that we had was we had a Reddit data collective that emerged because a community on Reddit was upset that Reddit was selling their data to Google, I believe, directly. And people don't contribute things to Reddit because they want to enrich an AI model. They want to contribute because they want to care about the community and provide information. And so in a subreddit thread, a bunch of folks, like, they came together and they said, look, we want to come together and build a data collective. And then they partnered with an AI engineer to create a model that was fine-tuned on their Reddit data. And it was pretty funny because it was really only good at shitposting. But it was like an example of how you can fine-tune a model as a community, and then the community owns that model now. So they get a lot of fun out of it. But it's like a novel way to kind of think about this future where we own some of the technology that our data goes to create. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah. Cool. So it is after 1 a.m., I think, where you are, Art.
1:17, yeah.
I was counting. And I want to be very sensitive to the time that you've given for us. But I have one last question. We are in Washington, D.C. I have to ask, what for each of you, what do you think the role could be for policy to play in securing a better outcome for our AI future?
I think
Jay,
that
you go first.
I think that policymakers can affirmatively support the building of open source research, and really there's two models here, and we've seen one is a sort of Manhattan-like project, centralized project that's moving towards AGI, like building the nuclear bomb of AI, and secrecy is required, huge concentration of resources is required. It's an arms race with China. And the other model is that it's an open, global research project that's being done by
just another
scientists.
field of research, yeah.
And there are many, many ways in which the federal government, other governments can support that latter model. And as I think hopes for an immediate leap to AGI are fading, it makes more and more sense to more and more people that we should, and many of the most powerful open source models are from China. I don't know what the reasons are. It seems weird that such a authoritarian government would see the most open models released, the most powerful open models released, but for whatever reason, I don't know if that's 3D chess or if the Chinese scientists just want to be part of the international research community or what, but there's a lot of role for the government to support decentralized, local large language models, open source large language models, and the ability of many more organizations to train a base model.
What do you think, Art?
Jay, I have theories about why China's open sourcing a bunch of models, but that's a separate discussion. We can talk about that. My wish list. Okay, so policy wish list number one, let's fix data portability, because it's the crux of why we've created some pretty perverse economic systems around data. We need to be able to move our data around. Like I'm an OG MySpace user. I want to be able to shift my MySpace data into Facebook. I want to be able to take my ChatGPT data and put it into another data provider. I think data portability is the crux of the problem here. So policymakers out there need to think through how we're actually transacting on data. Utah's recent Digital Choice Act is a step forward here, where they're actually developing decentralized rails for people to port their data from any platform or services. Please take a look at that as a framework. Generally speaking, in terms of what policymakers can do around AI, like I'm a graduate of the Kennedy School, but I'm quite a pessimistic person in relation to the speed of the policy process, which is why I've gone into enterprise. I think that there needs to be strong partnerships between technical people, enterprise, and policy in order for us to be able to create a new system for AI. This is sui generis. It hasn't existed before because AI is so special in its ability to move quickly. People will say, oh, no, this has happened again. This has happened in previous iterations. But no. I don't think there's a technology that has swept us as quickly as AI. And I think there might be faster technology in the future. That's beside the point. But I think that the way that our legislative and policy process currently works is not equipped to deal with some of the fast changes that we're seeing in the technological advancements. So we need better structures in order to be able to properly regulate and usher this technology in a safe and society promoting way.
Absolutely. That's a great place to end it. Thank you both for this discussion. Art, thanks for staying up late. We really appreciate you.
All right.
Jay, thanks for being with us. And thank you all for being here at PGP.
Thanks, Mike. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Art.